Sec 43-40. West Virginia beats Baylor. Neil Brown and company needed that win. So did Baylor. And weird things happened in Morgantown, but also West Virginia made the plays. And Paul, Craig, average teams, and that's what Baylor is, they're 3-3, make plays to keep themselves from winning games they should.
Yeah, both those teams did. Inevitably, it was going to be somebody winning, and the Morgantown curse continues for Baylor. But the biggest thing last night was they would follow up a really good thing with a bad thing. Blake Shapen's fumble came right after a really nice gain on a pass play. The Quaylen Jones fumble came after a huge fourth down stop on defense. When you have a defensive conversion, just by the very nature of that play, it's a good thing, a bad thing that happens after a good thing. You know, that just on and on and on and on. They had all of those kind of compile on them all night long, and there's a lot of issues that will dive into with this team. I think that they don't have a lot of dudes that are freakish athletes that can step up in that moment. They're really missing their stars from last year. Nobody's really stepped up in to make those plays when everything's not going your way and you need your stars to make a play. You don't see those guys. Plus, they have been ravaged by injuries, and that's not going to get any easier as the season goes on.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing's just pretty much a disaster at this point. I mean, from injuries to, the losses to last night. Last night was, I think inexcusable is too strong of a word, but I think you guys know the direction I'm going by referencing that word. Yeah. It's not inexcusable that they lost last night. That was an awful look. That was an awful look. That was an awful loss. Just bad. And I think for West Virginia fans, I wonder how many woke up today a little bit more clear-minded than last night after celebrating last night, as they rightfully should, and are now waking up today going, man, that was great, but oh, man, that means Neil Brown's probably a little bit safer. Because I'll tell you what, man, West Virginia, hats off to them and the effort that they had. And I know that went from an apathetic crowd and not a very good showing to Baylor basically taking a syringe of energy and shooting it into them over and over again to rile up the crowd to then cheer against them. It was insane how many self-inflicted wounds there were. And so by the end of the night, West Virginia sitting there clapping and applauding and doing all that. But I got to tell you, man, they're fine. They're good too. They're okay. But I almost feel like that loss for them kind of delays the inevitable in so many ways as far as, how they're looking at their football team. And I've been somebody who's really, been very positive about Neil Brown and all of that, but they're fine. They're okay. And that's good. And so that was a good win for them last night. But, I think it kind of probably covers up sort of where they actually are in so many ways. But then again, they've lost some close games. So good for them. They're probably about right where they should be. But I do think that was less West Virginia and that was far more Baylor. It was the story of that game in terms of the self-inflicted mistakes and not taking that game by the throat when they had the opportunity to do so time and time again. They just refused to make things easy on themselves. And, just too many costly errors. And some of those were West Virginia making a play, but a blocked extra point, a fumble in the football, and a scoop.
Not just a blocked extra point, one that's run back for 2 points. Yeah.
Well, okay, you know what? Yeah, blocked extra point, run back for 2 points. A fumble in the football when nobody touched you for a scoop and score. I mean, just stuff like that is just, it boggles my mind that they're making these kinds of mistakes. But here we are. So good win for West Virginia. I think it kind of corrects the course of where they are in terms of maybe a better positive feeling, but I think they're probably headed in pretty much the same direction they were before last night. And for Baylor, they're headed down. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I don't see a lot of wins left on this schedule with the type of football they're playing right now. And, they're capable of winning games, but not with that brand of football, not at all.
I want to put up a stat. One, there's a lot of things to get to. There's lack of pressure on JT Daniels. His receivers also made him look even better. He had a really good game, though. He made the throws. His receivers made catches. The secondary seems to be in either a different coverage or they don't know what they're supposed to be doing. Now, we expect Dave Aranda, the defensive genius, along with Ron Roberts and company, Curtis, Coach Curtis, you kind of knew they were young, but there are guys that aren't anywhere near. It almost reminded me, and I put this on to you yesterday evening, of what Baylor was like back in the early 2010s. I'm not trying to overreact here, but that's what last night looked like. People in the area, but not really knowing where they were. Here is a key. Turnovers. Bottom line, you can't do it. You surely can't do it on the road. Last year, or this year, In the last 2 weeks, Baylor has allowed 18 non-offensive points to be scored on them. Oklahoma State kick return, Oklahoma State safety, extra point block for 2, fumble return for a touchdown. 18 non-offensive points, and I'm not counting the extra points after the touchdowns. Last year in 14 games, 0. Not a kick return, a punt return, a fumble return, an interception return, not a safety, nothing. And they've already given up 18, and it happened in 2 losses to Oklahoma State and West Virginia.
Last year, they were the game changers. This year, they are being affected by the game changers. And the talk from Dave Aranda about losing their edge is very valid. Now, I do think that, outside of, the turnovers, the offense played really well.
590 yards.
Yeah, really well at times last night. Blake Shapen was locked in at times, but the fumble was a game changer, and they cannot escape those things. And when you have a team that is fighting average, they will, you'll find yourself back to it. You'll do a great thing, you'll do a bad thing, and you're right here in the middle, standing where they are. And that's when you get a 43-40 game against a team that going into the year, no one in their right mind would have picked Baylor to lose, even though they hadn't won in Morgantown. It's just, there are a lot of things that haven't worked out. Jack actually made this point earlier. We were talking, the defense has 2 problems. One, the defensive backs aren't knocking the receivers off their route enough to where if JT Daniels or any quarterback wants to make a quick run, read, throw, he can do that. So the defensive line, unless, you've got 5 Javon Curses up there, really has no chance. But also on the longer drop back throws, they're not getting to him either. So the defense is affected from all different angles. And if you had told me that the defensive line would be one of the most disappointing parts of this team last year, I've been like, you're crazy.
Over 200 yards rushing, over 500 yards they allowed as well. And they were absolutely riddled by West Virginia.
This defense is soft. I mean, they're soft in comparison to what we've become accustomed to seeing over the last few years. And I don't just mean last year. I mean, like the last few years.
Even the team that was 7-6 would bite you, would make you know you played them.
Yeah, you would at least wake up and feel it. I don't know that West Virginia wakes up today and feels like all that differently than when they played everybody else, except for the fact that it was on a weeknight, and yet they've done that. They've played weeknight games already. And the fact that it was a really high-scoring affair, maybe they're tired from that. They're not tired from the physicality last night, not in any way, shape, or form, because there was none to really be affected by. This defense can't tackle or is just not tough enough to tackle. They can't cover. They can't get to the quarterback.
That's a bad recipe.
I mean, so what they actually do well, you tell me, because all the things that you're supposed to do as a defense just in general or be really good at to be a good team, they can't do any of it. And, I just feel massively disappointed for the players because, I mean, I'm sure it's sinking into them and they're realizing it, but, we're halfway through the season and now they're setting it up to where instead of like, hey, here's time for the stretch run, let's get excited. It's like, oh God, there's 6 games left. Like we got another. I mean, that's how it almost feels after last night because that was just such an obvious win there for the taking and they did everything in their power to not win the game. It was so frustrating to watch. So, I mean, I thought last night was a gut check. I thought that they responded pretty well. I think if Blake Shapen stays healthy, they win that game. If Squirrel Williams stays healthy, that probably helps them, maybe pop an extra play to win that game. But the combination of injuries and just brutal mistakes and just the lack of toughness and physicality and swagger and I know that early on, West Virginia scores right out of the gates, and I was already bemoaning the lack of energy, and some were like, well, hey, just give us some time. And you can argue that there was a little bit more energy there. It's still not it's still not anywhere close to what we've come to expect. I mean, there's just, I keep going back to the word swagger, and swagger can be almost like obnoxious, but I don't mean it in that way. I just mean it in a little bit cocky, but only because it's backed up by actual confidence. And I don't feel like they have any confidence to really portray that right now, and it shows because they just go out there and they're just kind of there, and they make some plays because they're talented. So they're going to make plays inevitably, but they're not good enough to actually string plays together. And yeah, that was just a frustrating effort, but it was just kind of more of the same, quite honestly.
We'll hear from Grayson